What I didn't anticipate was within about a month, I had about $500,000 worth of business potentially staring me in the face. But at that point, I was a senior manager for U.S. Air. The regional got wind through the union that I'd been more successful than he anticipated. And he said, John, you have to make a decision. I eventually did acquiesce, and I said, okay, I'll take this on. And it was a real struggle. And out of the gate, not only the financial piece of it, but 9/11 happened. So we went a solid month and didn't move a single bag. We were getting work left and right. That was not an issue. The more that we grew, the more the float increased. And truth be told, I over-leveraged the business. So what else should I do? We're going to go out and try and find some private equity money, venture capital money, convince some friends of ours on how they could create an exit strategy, and hopefully create enough value where somebody wanted to buy it for a multiple that was appealing, and it was a win-win-win.
You spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people around the country. Where's this final mile thing going?
I don't think we've seen the tip of the iceberg yet. If anybody's paid attention to the final mile delivery space, when every other segment of transportation was suffering, we weren't. And there's a rationale there. When you look at the success that we've met with up to now, without or with limited technology, I'm very excited about what that's going to equal.
Want more game-changing insights from the best in last mile delivery? Stay locked in with Last to First. Follow us on social media for exclusive clips, behind-the-scene content, and expert tips. Subscribe to our podcast so you never miss a beat. Join the conversation. Send us some comments, drop in your questions, and become a part of the Last to First movement. Want to be a guest or know someone that should be? Hit us up and let's get them on the show. If you're interested in sponsorship opportunities, reach out to us. We'd love to work with you. Find us on social media with @LastToFirstPodcast. Send email to info@lastthefirstpodcast.com, or go check out our website and let us know how we can support, help, and bring you better content going forward. Now back to Last to First.
This is John Benko, EVP of Administrative Services with ADL Final Mile, and you're watching Last to First.
Managing independent contractors and gig workers is tough. Between onboarding, compliance, insurance, and payments, it's a lot to handle. And one mistake can put your delivery business in jeopardy of a major misclassification claim. That's where GigSafe comes in. Your all-in-one solution for managing 1099 workers seamlessly and cost-effectively. Get drivers onboarded in days, not weeks. Automate compliance and save up to 40% on insurance. Turn compliance into your competitive advantage. Visit gigsafe.com and give them the L2F discount code to get your first month's invoice totally free. Now back to Last to First. All right, welcome back to our next episode of the Last to First podcast. I'm your host, Jason Burns, and we have another insightful interview today. This person here is truly someone who is known to be one of the really advisors of the space. He's had a wealth of experience. He's advised me on many different things, several people's industry. So you're gonna get a lot of nuggets here on what it takes to be successful in the final mile industry. I'm joined today by John Benko, who is the Executive Vice President of Administrative Services with ADL Final Mile, who are one of the big players in the space. But more importantly, John's been a friend, a mentor, and advisor, as I said, to many in this industry, including myself. He's a past CLDA president and a Hall of Famer. John, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Jason, and thanks for your kind words.
Give me some love, man. Give me
Absolutely.
some love. So there's so much we could talk about, and I'm just thankful that you're here on the podcast with us and sharing information and knowledge. But let's start with ADL Final Mile. What is ADL Final Mile? How did it come together? Kind of what do you do today?
Sure. So it really was the brainchild of Randy Edmonds and myself. We were in Arizona 4 years ago, and we were kind of speculating on the folks that had done roll-ups in the past and why some worked and some didn't work. And we were kind of pontificating on how we would do it if we had the chance. And the more that we got to talking, the more that we realized that we knew an awful lot of people in our space that were our age that didn't really have a formal exit strategy, and decided to kind of flush that out some more. And so once we got back from the conference, he and I had several conversations and decided, what the heck do we have to lose? We're going to go out and try and find some private equity money, venture capital money, and see if we could convinced some friends of ours that maybe didn't have a exit strategy on how they could create an exit strategy. And we didn't anticipate that we were going to have as much of a challenge finding the money, because money was readily available. But really what the private equity and the folks that we were dealing with, probably a dozen and a half companies that we interviewed, what they were really searching for was employees. They wanted to buy us and plug us into their vision. And Randy and I kind of had a vision of our own, which was to find two platform companies, put them together, create some scalable synergies between the two, and then continue to plug additional companies in and grow that with a goal to go back to market over, a 5, 6, 7 year period. And hopefully, create enough value where somebody wanted to buy it for a multiple that was appealing, and it was a win-win-win.
Yeah. And so today, I know we're going to get back into the full story, but today, ADL, you've accomplished that. You have put two platform companies together.
So today, just full disclosure, the first two platform companies were Capital Express, and that was Monty O'Hare's company, still is.
Yeah.
And then technically it's McCallum Group Enterprises, which doing business as ADL Delivery, and that was Tom Jower's company. The McCallum brothers, Mark and Charles, were the founders. They rode off into the sunset, and Tom was really the value prop in that enterprise. We put the two companies together, and over the last 3 years, we've done what we anticipated we wanted to do, which was to aggregate them together, make sure that the processes were streamlined so that we could continue to scale that, and as we bring on additional acquisitions.
Need to scale your business without the hassle of growing pains? Meet AdLink, your go-to partner for outsourced talent solutions, designed to keep your delivery operations running smoothly and profitably. From customer support reps to dispatchers, including nights and weekends, to back office admins, AdLink trains each logistics coordinator in your processes and native systems to customize the solution to your business's needs. And with top-tier security and compliance, your data is always safe and protected. Optimize, scale, succeed. Visit adlink.com and use the L2F discount code to get $200 off your first month's invoice. Now back to Last the First.
Positions, be able to plug them seamlessly into that system. And so we've done that. We've acquired two additional companies since the transaction took place. And we've got a solid half a dozen other companies that we are beyond passive conversations with. One under LOI and is going through due diligence right now, and several others that we're trying to get to that point.
So many questions about that I'm a park we come back to, because there's a whole section on the M&A side. But what I know a little bit about it, this is putting together two pretty large companies, to combine north of 100 million. So there's a lot of questions I want to ask about how that gets done. Because that's not just easy. It just doesn't happen overnight.
No.
But let's go back to your origin story. Way before you got to ADL Final Mile, you were in the air freight industry, as I understand.
Well, airline.
Airline.
So I started in 1984 with Piedmont Airlines, 17 years old, right out of high school. Attempted for a while to go to college and work. Decided that I wanted to make a career in the airline industry, and so made the milk run. South Bend, Fort Wayne, Tallahassee, Charlotte, Philadelphia, and Tampa is where I jumped ship in 1999, and I started my first courier company in 1999 in Tampa.
How'd that come about? What gave?
Yeah, it's the age-old story where there was a need and it wasn't adequately being satisfied. So I was the customer service manager in Tampa at that point, and I couldn't get my baggage delivery vendor to come visit me. He just kept ignoring me. And so I was lamenting that with my regional director, and he said, listen, he says, just put a guy down there with a hand truck and baggage, tell him that you're going to rip the contract, and he'll come see you. Sure enough, he did. He came and visited me. He heard my tale of woe and, basically said there's not enough money in this business to make money doing what you're suggesting, because Super Shuttle was the vendor, and their primary business was moving people. and nationally. And so Tampa was just one location. So I gave him basically the business model that I went with. I said, they had 160 vehicles at that point. I said, break off 15 of them, take the seats out, and, treat this as a proper business.
Yeah.
He had no interest in doing that. He said, well, you let your conscience be your guide. If you feel like you don't want to use us anymore, that's okay.
Yeah.
What I didn't anticipate was that post that meeting, all my senior managers for all the other airlines were having the same service challenges. And within about a month, I had about $500,000 worth of business potentially staring me in the face. But at that point, I was a senior manager for, U.S. Air at that point. And, the regional got wind through the union that I'd been more successful than he anticipated. And he said, John, you kind of have to make a decision. And I already talked to Sandra that I was somewhat disenfranchised with the airlines at that point.
Yeah.
It wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and aspiring to where I thought I wanted to go, it changed. And so I was going to do something different. I just didn't know what.
So wait, I get the story straight. You were still working for the airline while you...
Yes.
Okay, so you started moonlighting on the side.
Yeah.
And you were picking up close to $500,000 at the first month of
initially it was probably $100,000.
Okay.
But then two of the larger airlines, Delta and American, said, well, we'll throw our hat in the ring if you're interested.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge there was that, newly minted business run out of my house and funded by the First National Bank of Benco. And so floating the loan, because they paid every 30 days. So I had to float to contend with. And so I eventually did acquiesce, and I said, okay, I'll take this on. And it was a real struggle. And out of the gate, not only the financial piece of it, but 9/11 happened. And so we went a solid month and didn't move a single bag. And originally, I had a traditional business model. So I went out and bought vans and had employees until I didn't. And, economically, the only way we could survive was to shift to an independent contractor model. And we did, and I forged through, 11 credit cards and making payroll very unconventionally was part of that, recipe that got me to the other side. And I don't recommend that to anybody. There were smarter ways to do it, but I wasn't gonna fail.
But stay there, because there may be smarter ways to do it, but the reality is, and you and I both get the opportunity to talk to a lot of folks who are new in this industry trying to figure out how to do it. And the question I get a lot of times is, how do I get that first customer? Like, how do I get started? And in your story, it was from a pain point that you saw, and you jumped at it. But then when you jump, you got to think about cash flow.
Yeah.
You got vehicles. In their case, you went W-2 model out the gate.
Yeah.
Like, just that I don't think it should be glossed over how hard those first few months are when you're just trying to figure it out. What ultimately gave you kind of the ability to get over that and get to a place where you're more stable?
Well, I think there was a Pollyannish part of me that just, I wasn't going to be defeated. Mm-hmm. I had Sandra to contend with. I had two. The boys were born at that point, Kyle and Gavin, and failure wasn't an option. Mm-hmm. So I don't care what I had to do to make it work. Like I say, in retrospect, there were other levers that could have been pulled, but failure was just not an option.
In the delivery business, efficiency is everything. And that's where Dispatch Science gives you the edge. Their modern, cloud-based, AI-powered transportation management system optimizes routes, provides real-time tracking updates, and automates back-end functions, saving you time and money. If you're serious about scaling your operations and want to stay ahead of the competition, Dispatch Science is your next move. Visit dispatchscience.com and book a demo. And make sure you give them the L2F discount code to get 20% off your first month's invoice. Now back to Last and First.
Every time I looked in the mirror, I was going to find a way, because I can't disappoint my wife. I've got kids to take care of. Mm-hmm. So it was a matter of, I'm not going to retire off of delivering lost luggage. So what else should I do?
Yeah.
And set about, the company that we got most of our contracts through at that point was a company called DSI out of Traverse City, Michigan. And DSI had all of the legacy carriers. So if you wanted to do business or deliver bags, you went through them, and they were transactional. So every BDO, baggage delivery order that they drove, they got a percentage of. They got a few cents for each one of those that they drove, and they drove millions a year. So a good deal for them. They also did pharmaceutical, and they were larger in that space. Baggage delivery was an add-on for them. And so we partnered up, and I started doing pharma deliveries for pharma reps, which used to be much more pervasive than it is today.
Yeah, yeah.
And that bled into some people, other folks that did that type of work, and ground freight and air freight. And so, weighing that all out, and back in the day, I took all comers, and I figured out through trial and error and getting socked in the nose that some things made more sense than others, and it distilled down. The other thing I would share, Jason, is being nimble and willing to shift from what you are doing to what you could be doing.
Yeah.
I think I always had an appetite to know that, I could have been the baggage delivery guy forever until I wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I was always open to what made sense. I just wanted to do it on my own terms, and I really appreciated the flexibility and the uncapped nature about owning your own business. So as an employee, it's very finite.
Yeah.
There's only so many hours in the day, and no matter what your title is, there's a limit to what compensation that you're going to make. And it was really appealing to me that I was the master of my own destiny.
Yeah.
And if something failed, I only had myself to look in the mirror at, and how am I not going to do that again?
Yeah.
Or, my gosh, we knocked it out of the ballpark. How can I duplicate that?
Yep.
That continues to be what motivates me, is that freedom that entrepreneurship brings, and the fact that I can create something out of nothing.
Yeah. I've been forced to talk to a lot of people on the podcast, off the podcast, and the one resounding thing you hear a lot, and you hear from investors when you're talking about, taking a bet or taking a risk on a startup company, like bet on the person. The idea is probably going to change.
Yeah.
There's going to be some other version. There will be a pivot, but the person, and really that conviction to say, I will not fail. Like there's no option to fail here.
Yep.
And we all have different motivations in life. Yours is your family, like many of ours, but that's what it takes to ultimately kind of have that entrepreneurial spirit to go out and execute. Walk me through. So going back to Manco, so you've got some traction going. You're pivoting, trying new verticals out. You air freight. You do pharmaceutical, the rep business. We did a lot of that business too back in the day. How are you able to evaluate when you said some businesses, some verticals are better than others? Like, what does that mean for the audience? Like, what should they be thinking about when you're looking at, is it good or bad business for me?
Absolutely. So math and science works, and so understanding what your true costs are, whether or not all of what you're trying to accomplish in a given day makes sense. So, probably partnering a trucking company with an on-demand company, there's just not a lot of synergy there. Now, you can have two very successful companies that operate independent of one another, but my goal was to integrate. And so, what size vehicles are required or make sense? What type of drivers are you going to need to be successful? How does the compensation, so doing work with some companies like Sterling, they don't really care what you charge them. You just can't fail. And other companies, they'll give you a ton of volume, and you can fail, and they'll still continue to give you business. So you have to understand what their expectations are, truly understand, and then how do I go about overproducing, and not under-delivering. And so I found that, if you measure things and you understand what the expectation is, so I own the relationship, I'm fairly priced because I know what my competition is charging, I know what I'm charging. Does it fit together? Is it scalable? If I can evaluate that properly, then that's scalable, and I'm able to, grow And it can shift, but you got to at least establish the goals.
Baseline. So with the like from a gross margin perspective. So if I were just asking you, hey, if there's a minimum threshold we want to maintain on business, it can fluctuate depending on certain things. But what's a target for gross margin, driver pay, maybe direct costs aside, you should be aiming for?
Yeah, so it really depends on the vertical. Because what you're billing out does count, and lots of people are successful despite themselves. So they will put a price that they're making money, they're happy, the client's happy, but they're either overpriced and overcharging, or they're undercharging and undervaluing their services. So what I know is that I pay the same thing that most people do for a cargo van, for a straight truck, for a tractor, for a trailer. I know what in a given market, what it's going to cost me from an employee standpoint. So once all of those variable costs that I can either plug in or not plug in.
Running a business comes with risk, but being unprotected shouldn't be one of them. That's why business owners trust CUI Agency for their insurance and risk management needs. For 50 years, CUI has helped transportation companies understand their unique risk, reduce their costs, and proactively manage what matters to them most. Specializing in commercial auto, hired and owned, cargo, warehousing, and professional liability coverages, the CUI team tailors solutions to fit your unique needs. Don't leave your future to chance. Visit CUIagency.com and talk to one of our expert producers who can give you the guidance you need to understand your risk and put the right insurances in place to protect your business. Now back to last and first. Scope of work, depending on the vertical.
Absolutely. If I understand that properly, now what's my time worth? How much is my margin on top of that? And so once you're able to properly cost a piece of business out, and like I say, costing an on-demand job out and costing out a tractor-trailer move is apples and shovels.
Sure.
And so understanding how to properly cost it out and then tacking your margin on top, and then how does that complement anything else that you do? And a lot of people have the thought process, and I know that I did at one point, commingled business. I really don't need to charge fair market value because I've got three different customers riding on the same van or the same straight truck. The problem with that thought process is that if you lose a customer, now all of a sudden you have to have 2 or 3 or 4 conversations that are very uncomfortable because you priced it out in that fashion. So I've always taken the position that everything that you touch should have a cost associated with it and a profit associated with it. And you shouldn't try and dilute because you can. That's not the customer's win. That's my win. If I can create a commingled situation.
Right.
A lot of folks, especially shippers, don't share my philosophy. And I was never really, I didn't have to have every piece of business.
Yeah.
I was willing to pass on things that didn't make sense. What I valued is somebody that found value in me, my services, and how we do business. If you can find that customer, not to say that I didn't do business with people that I really didn't care for and that didn't appreciate that, but by and large, most people that I chose to do business with were good folks that wanted me to succeed and wanted to give me more business. If you can find that circumstance, lots of things fall into place.
Yeah. Great stuff there. I want to get to the exit and end of Manco, but before we get there, talk about so this is 2001 when you first started the luggage, 2000?
99 technically,
okay.
but 2000 was when we kind of came and started doing business.
Okay. Formally, when you stopped moonlighting and
correct.
I got it. And so you sold Manco in what year?
Sold Manco in 2014.
14. Okay, so you had a 13, 14-year run there.
Yep.
How big did Manco get? Drivers, geography, verticals covered, and then ultimately, kind of why did you exit?
Yeah. So at our high water mark, we were $6.5 million. So we got a short period of time. I'll give you the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah.
So I took two partners, Brian Bilchek, who he was a partner by virtue of sweat equity and what he contributed to the company, which was significant. And I took on Dave Armitage in 2000, early in 2013. And the reason I took him on was one, the talent that he brought to bear, and two, I was wore out trying to be the only guy steering the ship, and he provided not only some sage experience, but he provided some capital, and it was partially the talent, partially the recapitalization that we were working on. We were getting work left and right. That was not an issue. To your point, though, so we took on Incenda about a year and a half earlier. And I'm not sure if you've done work with Incenda, but lots of cabinets. And I think it's a fair assessment to say that they take an inordinate amount of your warehouse space. And if you don't cycle it through in a timely fashion, it can really you can get on the wrong side of that quickly.
Yeah, these are cabinets coming into your warehouse. You're cross-docking them in with scheduled delivery times.
Correct.
But you're not getting any compensation on the storage.
Correct.
It's a true cross-dock.
Correct.
And a lot of times in these contracts, when you're out there, you guys in the audience, these contracts will have 30-day free grace period for warehousing, but that ends up being 45, 60, 70, 90 days in this tied up space. And
so I won't tell you that it was intentional, but we grew very quickly, both in Orlando and in Tampa at that point, and increased our warehouse space significantly, partially because of the cabinet work. And so getting on the right side of that and being as new as we were doing that type of business, and Lance Dearborn was a godsend, but unfortunately I was encumbered by contracts that were already executed, so I couldn't materially change a lot of what we were experiencing. And what we were experiencing was slow cycle turns, hurricanes. There were all sorts of debilitating factors that caused things just to sit in the warehouse longer than they should have.
Yeah.
And there was really no associated revenue. And so the more that we grew, the more the float increased. And it's not a uncomplicated type of work. And so there was the challenge of finding qualified people that could handle that in a successful manner.
Yeah.
So the culmination of all that caused, my float to increase. And truth be told, I over-leveraged the business. And at that point, my assumption was that the two partners were going to be willing to reshuffle the deck, if you will. And neither one of them had an appetite to invest.
Fast and reliable last mile delivery isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And that's precisely why over 270 global brands trust Drop-Off for their deliveries. With real-time tracking, professional couriers, and flexible scheduling, Drop-Off ensures your critical shipments meet their destination on time, every time, down to the minute. So whether you're in the healthcare, retail, or industrial sectors, or just looking for a logistics partner, Drop-Off has the experience, delivery network, and technology to propel your business forward in over 40 plus cities. Visit dropoff.com, click Talk to an Expert, and give them the L2F discount code to get 10% off your first month's invoice. Now back to last first.
More into the business, which put me in a position where I had to go tell Sandra that I was going to have to write another $250,000 check, and she wasn't game for that.
Yeah,
and she said, you need to make a decision relative to what we're going to be doing, because this is not what I anticipated, and I'm not okay with it.
How I appreciate you sharing that and being transparent, because the podcast is called Last or First for a couple of reasons. Obviously, to play up on the industry terms, but really these moments, like these critical moments that we don't talk about a lot. People see you today like, oh, John Benko's this phenomenal guy has walked down Easy Street, but that's not any of our realities.
Oh my gosh, no. I mean, there's lots and lots of challenges. That was certainly one. But honestly, I view it retrospectively as a blessing. because had I stayed at Manco, my universe would have been much more finite. I would have very likely not been able to make actionable what Randy and I ultimately put together, and I wouldn't be where I'm at today. And so the opportunities that flowered out of what you would view as potentially a negative turned out to be a wonderful positive. And truly, our keynote last night called it out several times, and it was curious to me that he kept saying, "I fail, I fail, I fail." Anybody else that would measure that man's life would go, "How many successes has this guy had?" So I think, glass half empty, half full for sure. But really, back to what I shared earlier, which is, I know what my worth is, and if you don't find worth in it, that's okay. I know what my worth is, and so as long as that continues to be true, I'm just going to find my next opportunity. I'm gonna continue turning stones over and make it work in my favor. And I think if you've got that mindset, there's almost nothing that you can't do.
I call it the creator mindset. So you can either have victim energy or creator energy. So the victim energy is anything that happens to you is happening against you. Woe is me. I've got no control. The speaker last night said it. Your story is a testament to it. When things happen, the creator energy says they're happening for me.
Yeah.
We may not see at the time. We may not understand why it's happening, and it may be very painful to learn a lesson. But there's something to learn in these lessons that, if you can flip the mindset to see it as an opportunity, I mean, that's where you can find a lot of success, because you'll just continue to roll forward through whatever's going to come at you in life, and it doesn't stop. It keeps coming at you.
Truly.
So you transition away, so you were able to exit the business. And then what do you do next? Like, so what's next? You obviously still have a wife. You have 3 kids at the time. So
I took about a 6-month sabbatical because I'll be honest with you, I was just wore out. And I took the time.
Is that when you lost your hair?
No, that was much earlier. Got to work with what God gives you. My sons are discovering this now. Genes work too.
All the jokes are coming back full circle.
So no, I exhaled. I looked at all sorts of things, because what I knew was this: transportation is all I ever did for 30 years. And so I wanted to at least take stock of what else was out there. Where can I bring value? So I looked at flipping houses. I looked at buying gas stations. A litany of things. Nothing really caught my attention. And so we're at Thanksgiving dinner that year, and my mother-in-law and my father-in-law and sister and brother-in-law, their kids are at our house in Birmingham. We're having Thanksgiving dinner, and the subject comes up, well, John, what are you going to do next? Sure, everybody's like, well, you got to do something. You're too young. You can't retire just yet.
Right.
Nor did I want to. And my mother-in-law said, well, why don't you consult? And I looked at her and I said, what's that even mean? And so, but it provoked me to think through, well, gosh, I know a lot of people, and I'm pretty good at what I do normally. How can I combine the two? So I called a litany of folks, some in our industry, some outside of our industry that did consulting, to try and understand what I potentially was going to raise my hand for. And I started JTB Logistics in 2019, and honestly didn't have a lot of anticipation that it was going to go anywhere, because if anybody that's ever consulted will tell you, what people hire you for is basically you. And so trying to scale it is difficult. So even though I owned a lot of really solid relationships, and there are a lot of folks that truly are looking for guidance in a lot of different areas, if you can't do it personally, you lose a step. And so kind of going through and feeling out what people wanted, and I won't bore you with how I build, but basically, if I didn't bring you value, if I didn't bring you additional business, a person, if something didn't improve, then I didn't get paid. And so it was a cost plus model, And I went out, I cast the net at several industry events and talked with those folks that I knew might have a potential need. And my phone rang.
Yeah.
It was a very busy 3.5 years, and the most fulfilling 3.5 years. The money was great, but really going into a friend's business, collaborating, helping them solve problems, and getting paid to do that.
Felt good.
How cool is that?
Yeah, yeah.
So I anticipate that there's consulting work in my future after my current venture winds up.
Yep.
But yeah, that was what I did for 3.5 years, and then after 3.5 years, I am into ADL Final Mile,
Yeah.
and we're going through and trying to grow that to the degree that we can.
I want to talk a little bit about the consulting piece, and I want to tie it into. Let me go back to one of our origin stories. So, I joined the board. I think it's 2009, 8, 9. You were on the board. You weren't the president at the time. I don't believe you were on the board. And our relationship didn't get off to the best start initially. We'll just leave it at that. And it was one of these moments for me where I was young and new, and not to have anything to do with it, but it was a moment for me where I needed to speak up on an issue, and you're nervous a little bit. You're nervous. You're new. You're in this room with a bunch of people who are very successful, and I spoke up, and where I thought that they would maybe create more friction, the total opposite happened. And you called me, and we had a conversation, and that led to me coming to visit you in Tampa. You used to at Manco at the time. And it's one of those moments where, you opposites attract kind of thing. Like you think you see somebody, you perceive, you judge a book by the cover. And then when you sit down and you start to break bread, we had lunch, and you get to talking about your story and how the parallels, and you really start to get a sense of who the man or the woman really is. And so that was something that always struck, cold with me from our early days. And I've seen you lead many times, whether it be in the board, different big decisions we had to go through. I always seem to be on the opposite side of these decisions. So John's got to always reel me back in. But you were a master at getting everyone kind of on the same page, even when you had differing opinions. And I think that's one of the secrets to your success and your secret sauce. When you were consulting, how do you might talk about working with friends, other businesses, you're consulting, so you don't have the leverage. But how do you end those conversations when you see them maybe going left, but you need to pull them back right? How are you able to convince an owner, type A personality, say, hey, we need to look at it this way? How do you open their mind up? Because they've probably been doing something a certain way for so long. What do you do in those moments to get them to look at
great
something
question. So I think any good leader understands, and so whether it's the board, because you're the president of the board doesn't mean you're a dictator. It doesn't mean you get to impose your will or your ideas on other people. I think the opportunity and the job of any facilitator or leader is to provide options and to be open-minded and to hear alternative perspectives. And ultimately, at the end of the day, whether it's in a boardroom or whether it's in a business, I feel that if you invite that conversation and you understand why the person feels that way, the collective decision is going to be the right decision. And it's my job to shepherd that conversation, not to impose my will. And if you do it properly, you can have differing opinions without being disagreeable.
Yeah.
And ultimately, at the end of the day, and I think I shared with you during our PHP discussions, which I know you had very founded concerns, and my job was to at least get you to look at why other folks were passionate in the way that they were that differed from your opinion. And then, at the end of the day, if it didn't go my way, then I just have to work harder next time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that I'm right and you're wrong. It simply means at that point in time, there wasn't a consensus.
Sure.
And so what I knew then and now is you brought a really different perspective because of your age, because of working in a smaller business rather than a larger business, because of your education, because of your parents, everything that made Jason Burns, I respected, and I felt an obligation, and I wanted the board to feel an obligation that it's not fair just to throw somebody in sink or swim.
Yeah.
I think that I was taught, I was mentored, and I wanted, to the degree that I could, I wanted to share that with you. And from a Manco standpoint, or from any organization that I've been in or are in, I think the same principles apply. If you go in and you put your goals and your beliefs on the table,
Yeah.
and you argue your position, everybody else gets a vote as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think collectively that approach has worked for me. And I think that most folks, even, like I say, even when it doesn't go my direction, just means I need to knuckle down and do a better job moving forward, continue the conversation.
It was a masterclass on leadership, and even though I was, admittedly, I can admit I was on the wrong side. He was certainly right. I was wrong in the decision, but it was again a masterclass on how to manage differing opinions, and I came away feeling respected, heard, and obviously we went forward and got on the same page, and we didn't look back. But you mentioned earlier, as a consultant, the phone was ringing. I was one of those phone calls that came in, and this was I'm bringing it back full circle because I don't think you know this, but at the time I called you when we were contemplating selling QCS, and the real impetus of the call initially, I don't think I told you this, was to try to help me convince my dad and my mom.
No, I didn't know
that there was there's some options in the plan, and really for me to understand how I can help convince and sell them. But in that process, you actually educated me a lot on here are the parameters, here are the things you should be looking at, here are the options, here's how we can present it, here's the do's and the don'ts. But also one of the things you taught me was in that process, make sure you're interviewing them, asking just as many questions. Like you're not just sitting here waiting for someone to come do something. You can go actively pursue and make sure you find the right fit. And I think most people don't understand, if they get into an M&A situation where they're going through due diligence, that you have a lot of power, but you also need to make sure that it's a good fit for you and for your organization. And I just appreciate how you've handled it. I know you've done that for several other people too. From an M&A standpoint, bringing back to ADL, I said I want to come back to this. So when you're merging two organizations together that have, I think both organizations were 25, 30 years old, easy at the time. A lot of history, culture, could be different operating systems, probably different verticals. Like, where do you start the conversation? Because you guys bought both pretty much the same time. So what was the plan to figure out how do we merge these together?
So very good question, and would seem to be straightforward, but lots behind that.
Sure.
And so I think the first order of business always is get a good baseline, figure out where are you right now? What is the culture? Cultures, plural. Who are the people? Are there any, front burner issues that need to be handled right now because of risk mitigation? Just try and establish where you're starting from. And then who's on the team? What source of talent do you have? Is everybody sitting in the right seat? For Randy and I, it was really difficult because, as you say, both of these are very seasoned, organizations that have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
So we don't know where any of the bodies are buried. We don't. All of that has to be discovered, and so that takes some time. And our commitment was do no harm. Just make sure that through that understanding process, that we don't lose a step. And so we did that. We certainly, through that diligence process with the private equity folks, most folks that haven't gone through it don't understand how labor intensive it is and how emotionally draining it can be, because most small businesses don't have an accounting team, and they don't have somebody that can press a button and produce what anybody going through diligence is going to want to look at. And so navigating that can be a real challenge. And then the mindset, I'll just speak for myself, it was different. When you're kind of the last shot caller, if something didn't go my way, I had levers to pull, and I did. And that's probably not, I know it's not a good thing. So there are more parameters and boundaries and guardrails, if you will, and there has to be, because you're going to scale something from one size to something much larger. And so you getting comfortable with that and staying productive at the same time, it takes a effort on everybody's part. The other aspect of it that I didn't fully appreciate is, Monty did know and continues to know everything at a granular level. Tom the same way, and trying to be a productive member of the senior leadership team was really took some time to understand, well, what's on their plate, what's even available to pull off of them, because the reality, what Tom would admit, what Monty would admit, is that both of them had way too much on their plate. And so even if we stood still, let alone scale, it would have been very problematic. And so in my case, what we determined was, well, even though it wasn't my favorite thing to do, I've dealt with lawyers because I unfortunately got sued often enough. I dealt with real estate. And so, we got 66 locations now. Somebody's got to manage that. From a safety and compliance standpoint, somebody needed to handle that. And it wasn't that either company didn't have protocols in place, but they were different. And in some instances, they were scant of where we wanted them to be. And so I took on that. The assets, when we first put the two companies together, everybody wanted an outsource model, 100%. And some of the business that we had, that we found ourselves with, required employees, required assets, and that was a out of the box, got to happen as soon as possible transition. And so I took that on and helped dilute, call it 140 vehicles down to, we'll call it 15 today. And that's even with the recent Henry acquisition. But all of that is, necessary, and I could pull it off of Tom's plate. I could pull it off of Monty's plate, and help in that regard in a meaningful way. Whereas, if they were, either one of them would have plugged me in operationally or, into a day-to-day role, oh my gosh, the learning curve would have been impossible for anybody. So that's kind of what I'm doing right now, and hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it did. And I want to also have you touch on when you were when the hypothesis of creating what ended up becoming ADL Final Mile. Was it strategically done to find certain operators that had certain verticals that aligned? And then just speaking to today, kind of what all those verticals you guys focus on, and maybe talk a little about each one and how they do kind of interact with each other.
Sure. So out of the box, Randy and I distilled everything we could possibly attach ourselves to from a vertical standpoint. Do we want trucking? Do we want home delivery? Do we want small package? And really we landed on three core verticals that we felt like were recession proof. And so one of them was aftermarket distribution of automotive
Okay.
parts, and i.e. ADL,
Yep. Yep.
and pharmaceuticals. So wholesale pharma distribution. So people are going to continue to get ill.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to go to the doctor. When you go to the doctor, what do? They prescribe something for you.
Yep.
Aging population. It doesn't stop whether the economy is in good shape or bad shape. You still have to have your diabetes.
Need your meds.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the third would be medical. And
Okay.
so we discovered that they are recession proof. They are not pandemic proof. And so we obviously deal in other verticals than those three, but those are the three that we're trying to gravitate towards for those reasons. And then in between, we've got a litany. We do e-commerce. We do wine deliveries. We do all sorts of things in the final mile delivery space that we can make money at. That makes sense to complement what we're already doing in those core verticals.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great because a lot of times we talk about verticals and trying to find the complementary ones. We talked a little bit about margin earlier on the driver side.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I want you to touch on, we didn't get into it, but I know you were working for a company. You had hundreds, maybe thousands of drivers you had to manage. The driver side of our business, because I think sometimes this is often missed, is that the driver is just as important as the customer.
Yeah.
Particularly if you have an IC model.
Yeah. So I think I shared with you years ago, he who dies with the most drivers wins in our space. And so it's not untrue that the ease of your business and the scalability of your business, the success overall, there's a direct correlation between the number of drivers, the quality of drivers, and if you're going to have an outsourced business model, that is something that has to be managed at a granular level. And so what I've always attempted to do is forge, and I've been pretty successful over the years of fostering relationships with people.
Yeah.
Drivers are people.
Yeah.
And so if I'm going to depend on 100% of my product getting delivered by those drivers, I need to be intimately involved in how they go about doing their business. Does it marry up? Is it the same as my goals and expectations? And then manage to that. And so whether it's one driver or 1,000 drivers, the principles are the same. And really, at the end of the day, whether it's an employee, whether it's a driver, I want it to be a win-win circumstance. So you've got a cargo van, you got a straight truck, you got a tractor. Here's what we're seeing in our target pricing is, here's what we feel like our cost is. I can't tell you what your time's worth, but here's what we have to offer.
Right.
Is that appealing to you? The more information that you can provide to a driver to make really a math decision. Does this make sense to you or doesn't it make sense? And I also find it helpful, especially when you have more drivers, to kind of educate, whether that was your goal or not. I've got 100 drivers, and if I'm paying per mile, $1.25 a mile, and 97 of them are happy at $1.25 a mile, nobody's saying a word. But I got 3 people that, I need $1.75 a mile. That's what's going to make me happy, John.
Yeah.
Okay. I want them to make an informed decision, though, and so what I'll say to Susie or Joe is, well, I've got another 97 that are at the rate that you're at. You want me to shop your route, is what you're asking me. Well, no, I just need $1.75, and I'm like, well, you may land at $1.75 because I don't know if anybody else is going to pick up another route. But before I do that, I've got to ask the other 97 and see what they say. And so
I love that.
You may not have a contract with us next week or whenever this happens. Now, that said, you may get $1.75 a mile.
Right.
And I'll share with you at that point, I'm on the hunt for another $1.25 because that's the business.
That's the business.
And so the other important piece besides the money, and the money is important, is it what that individual wants? So having a conversation with somebody about their contentment, is this what I shared with you? It's 19 stops and it pays this amount of money.
Yeah.
And, what do you think? You've been here a couple weeks. What do you think? Can avoid somebody just from not showing up and causing chaos.
Yep.
But too often, once we get the driver contracted, we cut them loose, and hope is our strategy. And that has not proven out to be a good strategy at all. So I would say with drivers, it's like all of us. They just want to be, they want all the information. They want to be able to make an informed decision. And then it's, whether or not it makes sense, only they can answer that question. And it's a perpetual process. As long as you stay actively engaged in finding the best drivers, then I think you're a couple steps ahead of most companies, because like I say, in my experience, a lot of folks are very reactionary. They don't really give it as much effort or attention until they have to.
Yeah. How many drivers roughly now within the fleet?
Well, last time I measured it, which was a week and a half or so ago, and it changes throughout the year. So during peak season, it goes up. But 1975 is the number that we had all in, and so that's truck and a truck, single guy.
Yep.
That is a master contractor that may have 5 or 10 drivers, and that's the guy that may have 30 routes.
Yeah. Master drivers. There's a number of folks here. We're at a conference now, and you have master contractors, and they're trying to get access to opportunities. When you are the operating entity, the ADL final mile, what makes you decide whether you're going to go with the master contract? How do you get comfortable with the master contractor versus more of a direct employee, or maybe you agent it out? Like, what's the thought process in those decisions?
So I can tell you that my position has always been for a long time that you need both. I think a large portion of our competitors, they would prefer to have the singular relationship, so truck and a truck, because the perception is they're less likely to go behind you and try and get a shipper to go direct with them. Whereas if you've got a master contractor or a carrier that you partner with, the perception is that there's a high likelihood that they could cut out the middleman and just go direct. My feeling has always been that if you get the right balance, and I honestly feel like that if you have, not 2 or 3, but if you've got 6, 7, 10 carriers or master contractors that you're dealing with, it gives you a ton of flexibility, and it also gives you the ability to shift responsibility. So right now, if I'm dealing with 1,900 trucks in a truck, when somebody calls off or doesn't do what they're supposed to do, very labor intensive, and I can't really expect them to have a backup driver for if the transmission goes out. So I get to manage all that. I would much rather have that group of folks that have 5, 10, 15 routes that I can say, okay, at 10, you need to provide a backup driver, and it's on you. And if that's not okay with you, then I got these other guys that do want that deal. So I think if you create a circumstance where truck and a truck has no overhead for the most part, and that's different, but he's very uber competitive. That's my floor. I know where I can get those guys. And then the carrier, who does have a lot of overhead in a lot of cases because he's got warehouses and he's got admin people and he's got customer service and all sorts of necessary support mechanisms within an organization, his price can be higher. It just is. And so what's the right balance? That's something that you have to constantly evaluate. And at the end of the day, I think if you're that involved with your folks in that way, you'll determine what the right spot to land in is.
Yeah, and a big part of it, you were going there. I think for a master contractor, like the stakes get higher, the requirements a little bit more, the criteria, insurance becomes a more important thing. insurance. I'm in the insurance space. I used to hate insurance guys when I sat in your seat. But here I find myself also slinging insurance policies. But more importantly, getting a chance to talk to owners about risk management, risk mitigation. I've learned a lot from you in the space, honestly, even though I'm the guy in insurance now, but we've talked about insurance several times. When you think about the risk in this industry, and I'm going to get your perspective on just the risk in this industry, and also when you're a company of scale like an ADL, Final Mile, are you able to leverage anything to try to find more attractive, a better insurance program? What are the things you guys are looking at to mitigate those risks? And how do you manage and navigate this, unfortunately, this rising cost environment of insurance?
How much time we got?
That's a good one.
So I continue to go through that exercise, but really, I guess I would distill it down into, again, understand what your starting point is. So what are your loss runs on any line of insurance, and what's your potential exposure? And so I think a lot of folks get sold incrementally over the years insurance that either is not as necessary, or they're carrying more than they really need proportionate to the risk. And let's be honest, at the end of the day, every company, the biggest company that you can think about, at some point they're self-insured. It's just what's your comfort level.
Yeah.
In our current circumstance, we have a stated out loud goal to go back to market. So our appetite for risk is almost zero. So anything that we can possibly purchase and feel good about mitigating that risk, that's our path right now. I'll say this, though. Monty did a fabulous job with Capital Express. Tom did a fabulous job with ADL. And I don't want to make it sound like that any of the coverage was unnecessary. I think that there are opportunities with whether you're $1 million company or $100 million or $1 billion company to understand that baseline coverage and what it's addressing, what your behavior is. Because honestly, at the end of the day, if you don't understand what you're likely to do or not likely to do, you're throwing money at something blindly. And so I think that once you understand what that potential exposure is, then you can go in with whoever you partner with and strategize around. Look at my loss runs for 10 years. Not a single claim. Do I really need as much as I've got? And so you go through that calculus, and then as you pull on business or shed business, you constantly have to look at what the right balance is. And some things are, auto, in our business it's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
And with these nuclear settlements that have happened over the last 10 years and the Amazon effect, to not have, a stout auto comprehensive policy around that, it's a bit of Russian roulette. And so what is included, though, and, who's getting paid commissions, that exercise I went through the first couple months I was there was, I discovered multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars were being spent because I bought a policy from you, and the broker, got a benefit from that. So the more he wrote, the bigger that benefit was. Well, how about you quote me a policy with no commissions? How about we do that? And I had several people that told me, listen, John, you can get that. They'll get their money some other way. And I'm not going to be upset that somebody that makes their money doing that makes money. I just want transparency, and I want to understand what we're purchasing, and I want to understand what my exposure is as something happens. And that needs to be a advocate. And so what I really look for is somebody before the renewal comes up, or 2 or 3 months before it comes up, that's going, John, let's look at this. Let's look at your umbrella policy. Let's look at your OCAC policy. I think that, people buy from people, and at the end of the day, when I find that relationship, that's valuable.
Sure.
And understanding, because listen, you well know, reading through insurance policies and
It's not the
doing what I'm suggesting is not exciting, and if you need material to help you fall asleep at night,
That's it.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
absolutely read some insurance policies. But the amount of money that you can save, it's one of the largest spends any organization has.
Yes.
And it's also one of the largest exposures. So,
Yes.
I'm talking about coverage that you may not need or that you may be overinsured. You may be underinsured or uninsured in some instances. Helping me review what my strategic partners have in the way of insurance. I was unfortunately discovered that there was some exclusions in some policies. Just because we have the COI doesn't mean that it's covering what they're hauling.
It doesn't.
And so you have to have somebody that's willing to do the work in that regard. And then, it really boils down to what your risk appetite is.
Yeah.
And what's that cost at the end
Because
of
you can't
the
cover
day.
every single thing. Yeah.
No.
We may want to, but the rest you can't.
It's not practical.
Not practical. And I think other times too, you have to understand the customer side, because there's many times where the customer, they're not educated properly, and they're asking for certain things, and it's just not it's not an inherent risk in our space sometimes. Yeah. And so you need to be comfortable pushing back a little bit on that.
Well, and that's a great point, because a lot of shippers will use templates, boilerplate templates on what they want. And I need a $2 million, $2 million, $3 million, $5 million, and normally we're carrying $1 million, $2 million, $1 million, and if you're not willing to have that conversation, then one, you may not even take the business. You may go, I can't afford that.
Yeah.
Two, you may end up with more coverage than you actually need, because everything's negotiable. And so especially when you go through acquisitions, we've seen where our limits were X and the person we're acquiring are Y, and we're going, wow, well, why can't I get his rate?
Why? Either why can't I get his rate, or they're underinsured, and I'm going to have to account for that in the transaction. Right?
That's exactly right.
One of the two ways you got to account for it. Even when you're going to RFP and you're going for new business, like I think a lot of people don't think about, would this increase my insurance exposure if I take this on? Until after you've already sent your bid number in there, and now after the fact you're trying to go back, and
it's too late.
It's too late. It's too late. So insurance is definitely something that I know I didn't take serious enough when I was operating my business. My mom did, and she always say the devil's in the details, and I thought she was just telling me some stuff to keep.
By and large, everybody's strategy is hope. Hope nothing happens.
Yeah. Let's transition as we get towards wrapping up. Automation versus manual, whether it be labor, whether it be systems, processes. I know you spend a lot of time in both Manco, other places you've consulted in and worked at, and certainly now ADL. And tied to, because where I'm gonna go next is the future, where we're going as an industry. But how important is that, to make these changes in our businesses as times are moving forward?
Sure. So I tell everybody to listen to me that whether you like McDonald's or you don't like McDonald's, what I appreciated a long time ago was they built a machine, and no matter who you are, I could pretty much go to work at McDonald's tomorrow because I know what a cheeseburger looks like and I know what a Coke looks like.
Yeah.
They have automated, and they've invited almost everybody into the conversation. So they don't have to worry about specialized workers or technical training. It is very elemental. And so I found over the years that if you can make it very elemental, that typically that works in your favor. And so one of the first things that I did, so safety and compliance as an example.
Okay.
Two large organizations, and it was not seamless. So depending on who the hub manager was, who the regional manager was, it was hit or miss as to whether somebody would report an incident when it happened, whether it be auto, whether it be personal injury, whether it be property. We weren't getting good reporting, and in a lot of cases, it was not timely reporting. So if I don't notice the insurance company in a timely fashion, I may not have coverage. They may deny coverage based on lack of notice. And so what I knew was that we can't depend on 150 different people and whether they're having a good day or a bad day, a busy day, a slow day, that it had to be something that had to be managed in a different way. So what we did was we found a intern from Georgia Tech that was IT centric guy, and he wrote electronic workflows for a whole host of things, for rental vehicles, for safety and compliance. So every time somebody, and we went through a training period where we would invite Jason in, and on your desktop, anytime something happens, you click this report, you fill it out, very self-explanatory. You can attach pictures and police reports and all sorts of support documentation. And then once you fill out the report, it goes to your supervisor, it goes to senior leadership, it goes to the insurance company, it goes to a litany of people that are involved. If it's an employee, it goes to HR.
Yeah.
And so then once that happens, there's an incident follow-up report. So it's great that we're a reporter and Jason stubbed his toe, but how did we help Jason not stub his toe the next time?
Yeah, mitigating.
And
risk,
so
risk management.
now we have that same manager gets a reminder after 7 business days if he hasn't had a follow-up with Jason. And the follow-up is my director of safety and compliance has little snippets, so PowerPoint presentations on the top 20 things that could potentially happen. Gear strikes, slip, trips, and falls, all of the things that you see on a repetitive basis. Now I can go to Jason and go, Jason, here's slip, trip, and fall. I need you to review this. I need you to acknowledge it.
Yep.
And that goes in the employee file. And now if we're challenged, one, we have good support, and two, all of us can feel good about helping Jason avoid that, and hopefully others. And that's only because of automation. We're not dependent on a single person. We got a team of people that are going to manage that. We did the same thing with, so we would go through and we'd do audits, and we got the same feedback, almost hub to hub to hub. Nobody's checking first aid kits. Nobody's checking the emergency lighting. Nobody's checking fire extinguishers.
Yeah.
Why? It's not because people don't care. It's because it happens very infrequently. So now we've got a form that comes out, and whoever is pre-designated, once a month they go through and they initial the fire extinguishers, they check the emergency lights, they check the first aid kits. If we're low on something, we order it. But all of that's automated. And so no matter whether we sign on another 2 companies or 20 companies, very scalable, and all we have to do is plug the new company in. So, rather than being people-centric, you need to be process and system-centric, and that can be handled in a lot of different ways. But that I think should be everybody's goal.
100%.
And it really will help when something happens. You're far more likely to be able to navigate that successfully than if you're depending on a person.
Yeah. Well said. You're referencing probably Michael Gerber, the E-Myth. Phenomenal book. I encourage anybody to read The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. But it touches exactly what you're saying, right?
Yep.
McDonald's does it because it's a system.
Yep.
It's not dependent on Jason or John or John or Susan. The fries will be the fries.
Yep.
Here in New Orleans, or same in Tampa, or same in Shanghai, China. That's what it's going to be.
And that builds confidence.
It builds confidence. It builds trust. And it also, I was mentioning,
Mitigates risk.
Yeah, the devil's in the details, right? All these detailed little steps that you're talking about that are often missed, that may seem very small. I didn't fill a report out and follow up, but that could become a significant claim. And then just tying back to insurance, when you get loss ratio, when you get a claim, it doesn't just affect it for that 1 year. That thing will stay with you 5 years. And so it's hard to get away from these things. And so I love that. And I love that you guys have taken those steps, because it truly shows an organization that is, going to be positioned for success for many years to come. As we wrap up, I think the thing that I want to get your thoughts on is the future of the industry. Maybe talk about it from the lens of where ADL is going and what you guys are doing, but also maybe just take ADL hat off for a second, just what you see happening globally. You spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people around the country. Where's this final mile thing going? It's been moving fast lately. What do we have to look forward to?
So I'm very heartened and excited about the future. Not that it hasn't been a wild ride up until this point, but oh my gosh, technology by itself has just truly changed all of us, and usually in a very positive way. And so I tell people often, if you would ask somebody 10 years ago about Uber, they would have laughed at you. And, they literally changed an industry with an app. And so I think that that's going to continue. I don't think we've seen the tip of the iceberg yet. I think that with AI, I think there's going to be some things that have not been contemplated that are absolutely going to be game changers all the way around. I think if anybody's paid attention to the final mile delivery space, when everybody else was suffering, every other segment of transportation was suffering, we weren't.
Yeah.
And there's a rationale there, and I think that will continue to be the circumstance, regardless of what happens with technology. We are what saves lives, and it's the end of the road. And so you can't farm out what we do. You can't automate it completely, and there's always going to be a influence. And so when you look at the success that we've met with up to now, without or with limited technology, like I say, I'm very excited about what that's going to equal worldwide. So, Steve Howard joined WPA, and I knew that there was somewhat of a disconnect globally between all of the different facets that they rep for. But really what I didn't recognize until I started speaking with some folks that are, they're doing 100% of their business not in the U.S. They are everywhere but the U.S. And they didn't know that we even existed. And they're using, common carriers, and they're using folks that aren't necessarily going to give them the best value proposition or service. And so I feel like that final mile delivery continues to have a huge opportunity to reel in business that happens every day that just is not on the radar screen right now. From an ADL perspective, I think it's more of the same. I think that we have accomplished an awful lot in 3 years, but there's a lot more to do.
You mentioned the two other acquisitions since.
Yeah, so ADL in large part we're sticking to the mission, and acquisitions are certainly a part of that. In addition to the acquisition, so we had Sonic, call it the spring of last year. Very good deal for us. It's already paid for itself inside of 12 months.
Wow.
And then Henry Industries, which covers the Midwest and has some good synergies with Capital Express. And again, a very good deal for us. But in addition to acquisitions, what we found is that the return on our invested time and energy internally with organic synergies and efficiencies, really we underestimated how much progress we were going to be able to make in a short period of time. So once we've seen, divesting ourselves of vehicles, the bleed over in a lot of cases of positions, just having one neck to choke instead of 4 or 5 different necks to choke, whether it's rental cars or propane gas or any supplies that we consume. So just getting better at how we manage that. And again, then we can plug somebody else in that comes on board with future acquisitions into that same platform. So feel very good about that. I believe that our initial thoughts relative to aftermarket distribution of automotive parts. So, during good times, people are going to buy new cars. During bad times, they'll keep their car and get it fixed. In both instances, that works in our advantage.
Yeah.
We already talked through the pharmaceutical piece of it. That's really played out. We continue to have an appetite to look at more medical type of verticals or opportunities, rather. And we'll continue to go down that path. But really, it's more of the same. What we've done up until now, and then, who can we plug in down the road that's going to complement that? And really, it's, what do they bring to the dance relative to what they're currently doing, both from a people standpoint, from a vertical standpoint. How scalable are they already? And, in some cases, not very scalable. Some of the smaller folks are a good tuck-in. In some instances, you have fairly large companies that we've passed on because their portfolio had, say an Amazon as a part of the complexion. And, we've got experience relative to who we want to partner with and who we don't necessarily want to partner with. So there's a lot to consider as you go through the diligence process.
Yeah.
And that's going to continue, I believe, to be our path until we go back to market.
Well, John, I appreciate you being on the podcast. Just a true testament to last of first, someone that went from, not working in the industry, seeing the opportunity because of a pain point, taking that leap of faith, growing your business and exiting, and maybe it wasn't the way you wanted to exit, but not stopping there, pivoting, helping other folks grow their businesses, and then seeing the vision for the future and being the kind of catalyst to create ADL Final Mile. It's just a true testament that you're never knocked out. The fight's never over. It's all about the journey to the finish line. And so just thank you for inspiring us, and thank you for along your way of your journey, continue to pull folks ahead. You've always the one. You call you. I don't care what time I call you. You're responding right immediately, and you give me advice. You gave me advice when I was transitioning in my career change, and you said the same thing that maybe your mother-in-law said to you. It's not to be a consultant, but take some time.
Yeah.
And figure out what you want to do next. And so I've always appreciated the wisdom and the sage advice. And so it's an honor to be here with you.
Well, I appreciate the kind words and very glad to help now and always. I applaud what you're doing with the podcast. Continue to be impressed with the pivots and the changes that you've made, which weren't insignificant, and how you've handled yourself. So just know that I appreciate and value the friendship,
absolutely,
and the professional exchanges that we're able to have. And good luck with last to first.
Appreciate it.
And we'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.